Love is not what you think it is. It is not divine, it is not eternal, and it was never designed for your happiness. Schopenhauer believed love was one of nature's most elaborate tricks, a cruel illusion that seduces us with passion, ecstasy, and dreams of fulfillment, only to enslave us for a purpose we rarely recognize, the continuation of the species. When you fall in love, you feel chosen, as if fate itself whispered to you. But Schopenhauer would tell you the truth behind that whisper. It is not fate, it is biology. Not your soul, but your DNA. You are not in control. You are a pawn in a game that existed long before you, a game that does not care if you suffer, despair, or die in regret. And this is why love is doomed to fail, because it was never meant to succeed. You think you're searching for a soulmate, but you are really serving a program. You think you're chasing happiness, but you are chasing the will of nature, blind, indifferent, merciless. This is why relationships collapse, why passion fades, why betrayal, jealousy, and heartbreak are inevitable. Schopenhauer tears away the romantic veil and reveals the abyss beneath. Love is not about you. It never was. And if you dare to look at it through his eyes, you will never see romance the same way again. Love. The word alone feels sacred, untouchable, almost divine. Every poem, every movie, every desperate song on the radio screams it into our ears. Love is the highest good, the reason to live, the meaning of existence. We are taught from childhood that one day, if we're lucky, we'll meet someone who makes the emptiness vanish, who fills the hollow space in our chest with warmth and purpose. And so, we chase it like thirsty wanderers crawling across a desert, convinced that the oasis of love is the one thing that will save us. But what if that oasis was always a mirage? What if love was never designed to last, never designed to fulfill, but rather designed to enslave? Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century philosopher who cast perhaps the darkest shadow across the Enlightenment's glowing optimism, dared to say what others refused. Where poets sang of love's beauty, he tore back the curtain and revealed its machinery, cold, ruthless, and indifferent to your happiness. He claimed that love is not about two souls uniting, not about divine harmony, and not about fulfillment. Instead, it is nature's cruelest trick, a biological imperative dressed up in poetry, a scheme to ensure the survival of the species, even if it means breaking every heart along the way. Schopenhauer was not a romantic. He lived much of his life in solitude, consumed by bitterness, convinced that human existence itself was suffering. To him, love was the most intoxicating lie ever told. It lures men and women into its spell, not for their joy, but to fulfill a will that is far older, far colder than they are. He called it the will to life, an unstoppable, unconscious force driving every living thing to survive and reproduce. In other words, when you fall in love, it isn't really you choosing. It's life itself using you. Think about it. You meet someone, and you're suddenly overtaken by obsession. You can't sleep, can't focus, can't eat. You write their name in your mind 1,000 times. They feel like destiny, as if the universe aligned itself to bring you two together. But to Schopenhauer, that sensation is nothing more than the will whispering in your ear. You don't want her for herself. You want her because your biology has calculated, in some hidden place, that together you could produce strong, healthy offspring. The shape of her hips, the symmetry of her face, the sound of her voice, all of it is nature's arithmetic. She is not destiny. She is genetics. And your obsession is not love. It is a baited hook. Schopenhauer even went further. He argued that love is strongest when the potential children between two people would be the most viable. That's why it blinds you, why it feels so irrational, why it makes even intelligent men act like fools. Love has to overpower your reason, otherwise you'd see it for what it is, a trap. He wrote that the lover sees in the beloved not the individual, but the future child. You think you see your soulmate, but in reality, you're staring into the face of a possibility, an unborn shadow demanding to exist. You are not in love with her. You are in love with the echo of the children you could create together. But here's the most devastating part. Once nature has achieved its purpose, once desire has led to reproduction, or once the possibility fades, love evaporates. The obsession cools, the fire dwindles, and suddenly you wake up next to someone who feels like a stranger. How many marriages collapse under this weight? How many people sit in the ruins of their relationships, whispering, "Where did the love go?" Schopenhauer's answer is merciless. It was never love. It was biology. It was the will. And now that the will has used you, it leaves you hollow, confused, betrayed by your own heart. Consider how this truth explains the cycles of passion and disappointment that plague our modern lives. Why do so many relationships start with fireworks and end in ashes? Why do we endlessly swipe on dating apps, chasing the next high, the next soulmate, only to end up disillusioned again? Because, as Schopenhauer warned, the will to life doesn't care about your happiness. It only cares about survival. It doesn't want your joy, it wants your children. It doesn't care about eternal love, it only cares about the continuation of the species. You are merely a vehicle, and love is the fuel that drives you forward until you burn out. This is why Schopenhauer's philosophy still unsettles us today. In a world obsessed with finding the one, he reminds us that love may not be a divine gift, but a biological trick. In a culture that sells fairy tales of happily ever after, he forces us to ask, what if the fairy tale was written, not for us, but for our DNA? What if we are chasing something that cannot be caught, worshipping something that was never real in the first place? And yet, and here lies the genius of Schopenhauer, he didn't just strip love of its illusions. He showed us why we suffer so deeply when love fails. Because when love collapses, it is not just the loss of another person. It is the collapse of the illusion that our lives had meaning. It is the realization that the thing we thought would complete us was never meant to. Love, in its truest form, is disappointment waiting to happen. It is the promise of fulfillment that life has no intention of keeping. When you look at it this way, the agony of heartbreak makes sense. It is not simply emotional pain, it is existential pain. It is life itself mocking you, laughing at your naivety for believing the lie. You thought love was eternal. You thought it would save you. And instead, you find yourself shattered, used, cast aside by a will that never cared. This is why Schopenhauer's philosophy still cuts like a knife. He does not offer comfort, or hope, or fairy tales. He offers truth, and truth is merciless. To love is to suffer, he says, and to believe otherwise is to be deceived. Love is doomed to fail, not because people are cruel or weak, but because nature itself designed it that way. Now let us step out of Schopenhauer's 19th century study and place his dark mirror in front of us today. Because the unsettling part of his philosophy is not that it belonged to a bygone era of candlelight and carriages. The unsettling part is that it still describes us, right now, in the age of dating apps, glowing screens, and endless swipes. Ask yourself this: if love is truly about selfless connection, if it is really about soulmates, why do modern relationships collapse at almost the same rate they begin? Why do people complain that they can't find the one, even though they are surrounded by more options than any previous generation in history? Why is it that the more we glorify love, the more fragile it becomes? Schopenhauer would say nothing has changed. He would say all of our stories about romance, from Hollywood films to Instagram posts, are clever disguises for the same biological drama playing out over and over. The will to life still moves us like puppets, only now the stage lights are brighter. Think of how relationships often begin today. A spark of attraction, a rush of dopamine, a conviction that this one is different. But underneath, your biology has already cast its vote. You're drawn to her symmetry, her health, the subconscious signs of fertility. She is drawn to your strength, your ability to provide, your subtle signals of genetic resilience. None of this feels romantic when spelled out in clinical terms. But isn't that exactly why we wrap it in poetry, in candlelit dinners, in whispered promises? We don't want to face that the will is choosing for us. Look closer at the endless cycle of modern dating. People chase connection, but swipe past dozens of profiles in minutes. They complain about rejection, but keep playing the game anyway. They long for stability, but secretly crave novelty. Schopenhauer would smirk and say, of course, the will doesn't care about your peace of mind. It only cares that you stay restless enough to keep searching, to keep mating, to keep the cycle moving. This is why breakups feel so devastating, not because you've lost your soulmate, but because your will has been denied what it thought was the path to reproduction, to continuation. Your conscious mind mourns the story, but your unconscious mourns the lost possibility of passing on its blueprint. Even the jealousy, the obsession, the feeling that you cannot let go, all of it is the will's grip on your nerves. And notice how modern culture amplifies this suffering. Dating apps maximize your exposure to endless possibilities. Pornography floods your brain with artificial signals of abundance. Social media parades couples who look happier than you. Each of these technologies hijacks the will, stretching it beyond its natural limits, turning desire into addiction. Schopenhauer never lived to see Tinder or OnlyFans, but if he had, he would have recognized them instantly as the will's new weapons. So what about men specifically? Why does Schopenhauer's truth cut so deeply for them? Because men often believe that if they can just be smart enough, strong enough, successful enough, then love will finally make sense, finally stay. But the will is merciless. It doesn't reward intelligence or virtue. It rewards compatibility with its blind mission. And this is why even powerful men can feel powerless in the face of love. She doesn't reject you because she hates you. She rejects you because the will whispers to her, "Not this one." Women, of course, are not spared either. The will speaks to them through different signals, often pulling them between longing and regret. She may choose the man who excites her in youth, only to regret it later when stability vanishes. Or she may choose stability first, only to mourn the passion she never experienced. Either way, she feels cheated. Schopenhauer's answer: it is not her fault. It is the will using her, just as it uses him. And here's the paradox. The more intelligent you are, the more you see this pattern. The more self-aware you become, the less you can escape the feeling that love is a cosmic trick. This is why many thoughtful men and women end up deeply cynical about relationships. They sense, even if unconsciously, that something doesn't add up. The fairy tale never delivers. The promise of eternal happiness with another person collapses under the weight of reality. Look around. How many people do you know who are truly, deeply fulfilled in their relationship after 5, 10, 20 years? How many are not quietly resentful, not secretly yearning, not numbing themselves with distractions? Schopenhauer would say, very few. Because even when love succeeds, it often does so at the expense of the individuals inside it. The will doesn't care if you are happy. It only cares if the species continues. This is why so many men today are retreating from traditional relationships altogether. They sense that the game is rigged, even if they can't articulate it. They turn to self-improvement, to solitude, even to nihilism. Some become bitter, blaming women. Others become monks of productivity, channeling their will into work or art instead of romance. In all of these cases, Schopenhauer's shadow hangs over them. The realization that love is not designed to satisfy you, but to use you. And yet, here is the most haunting part. Even when you know this truth, you cannot escape it fully. You may vow to avoid love, to remain detached. But the will is older than you, stronger than you. It whispers in moments of loneliness. It pushes you toward her smile. It fuels your fantasies at night. You may outsmart illusions in theory, but in practice, you remain vulnerable. And perhaps this is why Schopenhauer himself, despite all his venom toward women and love, could not help but be entangled in failed affairs. The will laughs at philosophers as easily as it laughs at fools. So what does this mean for us today? It means that our pain in love is not a personal failure. It is structural, built into the very design of life. Your heartbreak was not your stupidity, nor was it her cruelty. It was the will fulfilling its brutal contract. And unless you see this, you remain doomed to repeat it, chasing illusions, confusing instinct for destiny, calling biology by the name of romance. Schopenhauer's answer is dark, but it cuts with clarity. Love is not the sanctuary we dream of. It is the battlefield where the will manipulates us. And until you see that, until you strip the disguise away, you will suffer the same cycle again and again. Schopenhauer's teachings are not meant to console. They are not warm whispers that tell you everything will work out in the end. His philosophy is a scalpel, sharp, cold, cutting through illusions until you are left staring at bone. But paradoxically, in that cut, there is a strange kind of liberation. Because when you stop lying to yourself, you finally begin to live on your own terms. And so, if we are to distill his brutal vision into practical lessons, they come in the form of warnings, commands, reminders of what you must not forget if you want to stop being a slave to illusions. First, never confuse love with salvation. The modern world sells you the fantasy that finding the one will heal you, complete you, rescue you from loneliness. Schopenhauer laughs at this lie. To him, love is nothing more than the will to life manipulating you into reproducing, dressing it up in romance so you will obey. That means if you make love your purpose, you are simply worshiping nature's trick. His command is simple: never kneel to the illusion. Enjoy love, yes. Feel it, taste it, even suffer for it, but never mistake it for the ultimate meaning of life. The moment you do, you hand over your freedom. Second, expect suffering, and you will not be crushed by it. Schopenhauer believed that life is stitched together with pain, disappointment, and striving. Most men spend their energy trying to escape this truth, numbing themselves with distractions, clinging to fantasies of perfect futures. But the wiser man accepts pain as inevitable. He walks into life like a soldier walks into battle, already knowing wounds are certain. And when the blow comes, he does not cry out in shock because he was prepared. If you take this lesson seriously, you will stop demanding a painless existence and start building strength for the storms you know are coming. Third, never chase permanence in relationships. Schopenhauer observed that desire burns bright, but always fades. The very act of attaining love often kills the flame that created it. What was once obsession turns to indifference, and what was once ecstasy becomes routine. The illusion of eternal passion is precisely that, an illusion. If you expect it, you will resent reality. Instead, see relationships as shifting tides. They rise, they fall, they break. If you cling to them as unchanging, you will drown. If you ride them as they are, you will not be destroyed when the wave crashes. Fourth, guard your freedom above all. Schopenhauer, who lived much of his life in solitude, knew the price of giving yourself away too cheaply. The modern man often sacrifices his freedom to keep a partner, to appease a crowd, to avoid conflict. But every sacrifice of freedom builds a silent prison. His philosophy whispers, "It is better to be alone and free than entangled and enslaved." This does not mean rejecting relationships or bonds, but it does mean keeping your autonomy untouchable. The moment your will is bent beyond recognition just to keep someone, you are no longer living your life. You are living theirs. Fifth, redirect your will. Schopenhauer believed the will to life, this blind, restless force, will never stop tormenting you as long as you serve it blindly. But there is one escape he offered, one path where the will's chains loosen. That is through art, philosophy, and disciplined living. When you contemplate a symphony, when you lose yourself in a painting, when you wrestle with an idea until it reveals its truth, you step outside the endless cycle of craving, even if only for a moment. His command, then, is to build a life that is not only about satisfying the will, but about transcending it. Without that, you remain nothing but a puppet. Sixth, accept solitude as a teacher, not a punishment. Schopenhauer's life was marked by loneliness, and yet he did not see this as purely a curse. He argued that most men cannot stand being alone because when silence falls, they are forced to face themselves. But the strong man learns to embrace it, to see solitude as a crucible where illusions burn away and clarity emerges. If you cannot endure being alone, you will forever be dependent, clinging to others not out of love but out of fear. And fear is the root of weakness. Finally, remember that strength is born not from escaping pain, but from confronting it without lies. The modern man is conditioned to seek pleasure, to hide from discomfort, to soften every edge of existence. Schopenhauer despised this. To him, true dignity arises only when a man looks suffering in the eye and refuses to flinch. Do not ask for life to be easier. Do not beg for happiness to arrive. Instead, sharpen your soul until you can carry life as it is, heavy, brutal, imperfect, without being broken. That is where freedom begins. These lessons may sound merciless. They are, but in their severity lies their power. Because unlike the sweet delusions of pop psychology or Hollywood romance, Schopenhauer's wisdom does not shatter under reality. It prepares you for reality. And when everyone else is destroyed by the collapse of their illusions, you will still be standing. And so we arrive at the truth Schopenhauer left us with, a truth most people will spend their entire lives running from. Love is not eternal. It was never meant to be. It was not built for happiness or comfort or the warm promise of forever. It was built as a trick of nature, a mask for the will to life, a shadow play of attraction and longing designed to keep the species alive. This is why relationships collapse, why passion fades, why two people who once swore to die for each other now barely speak. It is not because you are broken or unlucky or unworthy. It is because the foundation was always fragile, because what we call love was never about you at all. It was about something far colder, far more ancient, the blind striving of life itself. Schopenhauer's lesson cuts to the bone. To seek salvation in love is to chase a ghost. And yet, that does not mean you are condemned to despair. What it means is that the burden is heavier, the responsibility is greater. If love is destined to fail as nature's promise of fulfillment, then it is not love that must carry your existence. It is you. You must be the one to give your life meaning. You must be the one to build strength, purpose, and power. Only then can you approach love not as a desperate plea for completion, but as an addition to a life already whole. And even when it fails, even when the fire burns out, you will not be destroyed because you were never dependent on it. Schopenhauer forces us to confront a cruel paradox. We are wired to long for love, yet love will always disappoint. To live blindly in that cycle is to suffer endlessly. To see it for what it is, however, is to gain a strange kind of freedom. Because once you stop expecting love to save you, you are no longer its prisoner. So the next time you fall into desire, the next time you imagine that this person will finally heal you, remember Schopenhauer's haunting truth. Love was never about you. It was the will of life using you. But knowing this, truly seeing it, gives you back your power. Because when the illusion fades, you will remain. And that, perhaps, is the only form of love that never fails. The love of truth, the love of clarity, the love of life itself, even in its darkness.